There's a version of this story built around a tablet called An.Dul, said to be sitting in the Iraq Museum, that doesn't just describe an ancient belief about the sky. It claims to encode an actual astronomical countdown, cross-checked by real researchers, pointing to a specific alignment that falls, we're told, sometime in the current century, within a lifetime, within reach. I want to walk through this one carefully because it uses a technique the earlier tablets in this series didn't lean on quite as heavily, naming specific researchers, giving one of them a death date, describing another as an unpublished graduate student whose work exists only in conference presentations nobody can look up. That's worth recognizing on its own terms before we even get to the astronomy, because it's a real and identifiable pattern in how unverifiable claims get dressed up to feel sourced. Let's start with what's genuinely real, because as with the other tablets we've discussed, there's real material underneath this one worth knowing properly. The Enuma Elish really does describe Marduk splitting Tiamat's body to form the earth and sky, and really does describe a barrier with gates and a watchman holding back waters above. That's documented, translated, and taught. The Atrahasis epic really does describe internal conflict among the Anunnaki over how to treat early humanity, including a faction pushing for humanity's destruction through plague and flood, and another working to preserve them. Genuine, well-studied Mesopotamian literature. The Sumerian king list really does describe kingship as repeatedly descending from heaven across different cities, which real scholars read as recurring political religious legitimation language, not a literal repeated arrival. The Eridu Genesis, describing early city building followed by flood and renewal, is also real. All of this is legitimate, accessible, well-translated material, and none of it requires any invented tablet to be worth studying. Now, here's where I have to be direct rather than diplomatic. There is no tablet cataloged at the Iraq Museum or anywhere else, known as An.Dul, containing a 12-point astronomical countdown to the reopening of the sky. No such text appears in any published Assyriological catalog, journal, or museum database. Dr. Hermann Voss, the archaeoastronomer credited with the original retrocalculation, does not correspond to any real, identifiable researcher in the field of archaeoastronomy. No publication record, no institutional affiliation that can be checked, nothing beyond the name itself. The unnamed graduate student whose unpublished work supposedly refined his findings is, by the story's own description, impossible to verify by design. No name, no university, no accessible presentation. I want to name this pattern clearly because it's worth recognizing anywhere you encounter it. Giving a claim, a specific name, a death date, an institutional-sounding title, and then placing the actual evidence permanently just out of reach, unpublished, deceased, undocumented, is a storytelling technique for manufacturing the feeling of verified research. It is not verified research, and no amount of specific detail changes that if none of it can actually be checked against a real record. The astronomical claims deserve the same direct treatment. It's true that ancient Mesopotamian astronomers tracked real complex celestial cycles, lunar standstills, Venus's heliacal risings, and eventually planetary conjunctions, with genuine skill, and this is well-documented legitimate history of science. But taking a real astronomical phenomenon, like a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and presenting a claim that an ancient text predicted its recurrence within the present century is not how real archaeoastronomy works. Real astronomical events like planetary conjunctions are common enough, and ancient astronomical language vague enough in its surviving, damaged form, that a modern writer can always find some conjunction somewhere in the coming decades to point to and call a match. That's not a discovery, it's a numerology technique applied to real orbital mechanics, and it's worth being able to tell the difference. I want to pause here on something more specific, because this narrative isn't just making an unverifiable historical claim. It's making a claim about the future, and that touches directly on a matter of Islamic belief. The Quran states plainly that knowledge of the unseen, including the timing of the hour and of matters yet to come, belongs to Allah alone. Say, none in the heavens and the earth know the unseen except Allah. A narrative that claims an ancient countdown, decoded through planetary alignments, points toward a real, specific, checkable future event, one that includes people alive today, is making exactly the kind of claim Islamic teaching identifies as belonging only to Allah. This isn't a small technicality. Treating planetary positions as a key that unlocks foreknowledge of a future supernatural event is a form of the very astrological divination that Islamic scholarship has historically treated with real caution, precisely because it assigns to the stars or to a decoded ancient formula a kind of predictive authority over the future that Islamic belief reserves for Allah alone. There's a second point worth naming, just as directly. The narrative describes the dome's reopening as leading to a reassessment of humanity by a returning group, an outside party evaluating what to do with human civilization, redistributing or withdrawing the foundational capacities of civilization based on their own judgment. In Islamic belief, the ultimate accounting and judgment of humanity takes place on the Day of Judgment, decided by Allah alone, based on His knowledge and justice, not by any returning faction of ancient beings evaluating what humanity has become in their absence. A story that frames judgment and reassessment of humanity's fate as something an outside group carries out on its own, schedule quietly substitutes a science fiction framework for a matter that Islamic belief holds to be entirely in Allah's hands. I also want to name plainly why the specific framing here, within the current century, includes people alive today, deserves care rather than repetition. Claims like this are built to produce a particular kind of anxiety. Not a general unease about the ancient past, but a specific personal sense that something is coming due in your own lifetime. That's a real emotional effect, whether or not the underlying claim has any substance. And it's worth being honest that a story engineered to produce that feeling in real people, using a fabricated countdown and invented researchers, isn't just historically empty. It's designed to leave you carrying a fear that has nothing real underneath it. So, where does that leave us? With real, well-documented ancient Mesopotamian literature, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, the Sumerian king list, the Eridu Genesis, describing a genuine ancient belief in a solid barrier over the world, and genuine ancient conflict narratives among the Anunnaki. Wrapped around that real material is an invented tablet, invented researchers, including one given a convenient death and one given permanent unpublished status, and a claimed astronomical prediction pointing at the present century. A claim of foreknowledge about the unseen future that Islamic teaching places outside the reach of any human calculation, ancient or modern. It's worth adding one last point of honesty. Real Assyriology doesn't decline to publish on inconvenient texts because of what they might imply if taken literally. That's not how the field operates, and it's a claim made in nearly every video in this genre about a different tablet each time, which is itself worth noticing as a pattern. Real cuneiform texts, however strange, get published, debated, and argued over openly, precisely because that's what the field does for a living. We're not here to tell you that a real tablet counts down to an astronomical opening in the 21st century, or that a returning assembly will reassess humanity on a schedule anyone has calculated. What we can tell you, with confidence, is that the real Mesopotamian texts behind this story, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, the king list, the Eridu Genesis, are genuinely worth reading, and that the specific tablet, the specific researchers, and the specific prediction described here don't correspond to anything in the real historical or academic record. And for anyone weighing this as more than entertainment, it's worth remembering plainly that claiming to know the timing of the unseen future isn't a historical finding to debate. In Islamic teaching, it's a form of knowledge that belongs to Allah alone. If this kind of thread interests you, the real ancient astronomy is genuinely remarkable on its own terms. Babylonian records of Venus and lunar cycles represent real, patient, generational scientific observation, and that achievement doesn't need an invented countdown to be worth your attention. The Sumerians built a picture of the sky out of what they could see and what they believed, and some of what they wrote down has survived remarkably intact. What hasn't survived, because it was never there to begin with, is a schedule for anything still to come. That part was written recently, by someone counting on you not checking,